Late-night television was supposed to be safe, but some guests never followed the script. One was slapped so hard he flew out of his chair. One kicked at the host's face, wearing 6-inch platform shoes. One handed over her underwear on live television. Another climbed onto the couch and dropped to his knees 5 times. These weren't interviews anymore. They were accidents the cameras couldn't stop filming. And what happened in those few minutes changed late night forever. Some of them were never invited back. 1. Andy Kaufman and Jerry Lawler. Andy Kaufman, the comedian from Taxi, spent the early 1980s touring comedy clubs in a dirty t-shirt and challenging women to wrestle him for a $1,000 prize. He called himself the intergender wrestling champion of the world. Vince McMahon Sr. would not let him onto the pro wrestling circuit, so Kaufman found another way in. Through wrestling journalist Bill Apter, he reached out to Memphis wrestler Jerry "The King" Lawler. That led to April 5, 1982, at the Mid-South Coliseum. Lawler pile-drove Kaufman twice, and Kaufman was taken out in an ambulance wearing a neck brace. Officials at St. Francis Hospital confirmed the neck injuries were real. Still, the feud itself was not. Then came July 28, 1982. The two men appeared together on Late Night with David Letterman, and Kaufman was still wearing the neck brace. The plan had already been worked out. Both men were supposed to apologize, and then Kaufman would end the segment by singing, "What the world needs now is love, sweet love." But Kaufman had kept one detail to himself. He had not told Lawler that he was going to demand an apology before offering one of his own. So on air, Kaufman said, "I could have sued you for everything you're worth. And I didn't, because I'm not that kind of a guy." Lawler shot back, "What kind of a guy are you?" At that point, everything snapped. As Letterman tried to send the show to commercial, Lawler got up, walked around the desk, and slapped Kaufman so hard that he flew out of his chair. When the show returned, Kaufman was pacing at the far side of the stage, shouting a profanity-filled rant, and then he threw Letterman's cup of coffee at Lawler. Afterward, Letterman deadpanned on air, "I think you can use some of those words on TV, but what you can't do is throw coffee." 2. Crispin Glover. 5 years to the day after the Kaufman slap, another unforgettable guest walked onto Letterman's set. This time, it was Crispin Glover. He arrived dressed in vertical striped pants, a clashing horizontal striped polo, a flowing off-center wig, and black 6-inch platform shoes. He was there to promote River's Edge, but from the moment he sat down, the interview felt strange. Glover brought along a suitcase filled with newspaper clippings about himself and started reading from them. He mumbled, squirmed, and tried to explain how the press twisted things. At one point he said, "I'm having a very good summer," but even that sounded unsettling. Letterman could feel it too. Turning to bandleader Paul Schaffer, he joked, "Paul, is this the first time you've seen another man drown? Is this the first time you've seen another man die?" Then the interview took a sharp turn. Glover suddenly stood up, announced that he was strong and could kick, and snapped out a karate kick that landed just inches from Letterman's face. Letterman jumped up and rushed off the set. "I'm gonna go check on the top 10, he said, leaving Glover sitting there alone on the couch. When the show came back, Glover was gone. Letterman looked shaken, but he turned it into comedy. He told the audience, "I think that's the first time that we've been doing this show that a guest actually tried to kick me." Then he called Glover some goofball, some dork from wherever, and added that he had come very close to denting his head with those giant shoes. Then came the line that sealed it. "I don't need that. I'm 40. I went to college. That is not how I want my life ended." What made the whole thing even stranger is that Glover, has never really explained it. For almost 40 years, when people ask him about that appearance, he gives the same answer. "I neither confirm nor deny that I was ever on the David Letterman show." Then, 4 years later, his 1991 film Reuben and Ed featured a character named Reuben Farr, who dressed like him and delivered a kick that looked almost exactly the same. 3. Madonna. By early 1994, David Letterman had been making Madonna jokes in his monologue for months. Then, on March 31st, the jokes came back at him in a way no one forgot. That episode became the most censored late-night broadcast in American network television history. Madonna said the word "fuck" 14 times in a row. Before the show, segment producer Daniel Kellison had worked out a plan with her. Madonna would come out, accuse Letterman of always picking on her, and then play clips of his worst jokes about her. The whole point was to make him squirm. She agreed. But when she arrived at the Ed Sullivan Theater, everything was different. Kellison later wrote that she had been smoking Endo. Years later, during a 2009 appearance, Madonna herself told Letterman she had smoked a joint before going on. From the second she walked out, the energy was off. She sat down with slicked-back black hair and within 90 seconds called Letterman a sick fuck. Then she handed him a pair of her underwear and told him to smell them. "Aren't you going to smell them?" she asked on air. "I gave him my underpants, and he won't smell them." Letterman refused. She kept pushing, telling him, "You can't get through a show without talking about me, or at least thinking about me." And she did not stop when her segment was supposed to end. She stayed on so long that a scheduled guest, the reigning U.S. grocery bagging champion, got pushed aside. Even Counting Crows, who were making their network television debut that night, nearly got bumped too. Still, the chaos brought viewers. Around 9 million people watched the episode, making it one of the highest-rated late-show broadcasts ever. The next morning, the New York Post ran the headline, "Stupid Madonna Tricks Sex Star Goes Ape on Letterman." Entertainment. Weekly called her behavior a sullen, crude rebelliousness. Letterman, of course, did not let it go. The very next night, he had guest Charles Grodin hand him a pair of underwear. Then, a few weeks later, on Letterman's birthday, Madonna faxed him a message that read, "Happy freaking birthday, Dave. Glad you could get so much mileage out of the freaking show. Next time you need some freaking publicity, just give me a fucking call. Love, the Antichrist." 4. Drew Barrymore. A year later, another moment landed on Letterman's show that people still talk about. Drew Barrymore was only 20 years old. Letterman was about to turn 48. The other guests that night were Al Franken and Placido Domingo Jr., but almost nobody remembers that now. Barrymore had already been everywhere by then. She had posed for the January 1995 cover of Playboy, and not long before the taping she had performed a striptease at the Manhattan club Blue Angel. So when Letterman brought it up, the conversation quickly moved in a direction no one expected. "Would you like me to do a dance for you?" she asked. Then she turned to bandleader Paul Schaffer and told him to start the music. A second later, she climbed onto Letterman's desk, turned her back to the audience so she was facing him, swayed, twirled, and briefly lifted her shirt. Afterward, she sat back down and told him, "I would have only done it because it was your birthday." Letterman, trying to recover, answered, "I can't thank you enough for that," and cut straight to commercial. The moment did not stay inside the studio. It was broadcast into living rooms all across North America, and it was also shown live on a Sony Jumbotron in Times Square. Barrymore would go on to appear on The Late Show 20 times in total, but that was the appearance people never forgot. Years later, in a 2015 interview with Entertainment Weekly, she said the whole thing was completely spontaneous and not calculated in any way. 5. Courtney Love. 9 years after Drew Barrymore's desk dance, Courtney Love made her own wild entrance into Letterman history. It was St. Patrick's Day, and very quickly, the interview went off the rails. At one point, Love jumped up onto Letterman's desk, lifted her skirt, and flashed him. But that was only part of it. She had been acting strangely throughout the entire segment, and the uneasy feeling never really went away. In fact, later that same night, she was arrested. When she returned to the show in 2010, she looked back on that stretch of her life and described it with brutal honesty. "They had to douse me out and clean off and pick all the little things out of my hair," she said. She even gave that whole era a name. She called it her Letterman years. Later, while in rehab, she wrote Letterman an apology letter. He confirmed that he received it. 6. Farrah Fawcett. Farrah Fawcett came on the show in 1997 to promote her Playboy cover and a pay-per-view special called All of Me. She had just turned 50. On paper, it sounded like a normal celebrity interview. In reality, it became one of the strangest appearances Letterman ever had to manage. She arrived late and explained it by saying there were people, lots of people. Once she finally sat down, the conversation wandered almost immediately. She told stories that seemed to go nowhere. At one point, she volunteered that she and her mother must have conceived their children on the same day because they shared birthdays. Then, in the middle of speaking, she got distracted by the studio lights overhead. Still, the part people remember most came when she suddenly stopped and stared at the fake New York skyline behind Letterman. "Wow," she said, clearly believing for a moment that it was the real city. Usually Letterman liked to needle guests when things got awkward, but this time he softened. He handled most of the interview gently, almost like he was trying to protect her from the moment. Even so, the segment stretched to nearly 20 minutes and left viewers confused. Then, in 1999, Fawcett said the whole thing had actually been a performance. Very few people believed her. She died of cancer on June 25, 2009, and the mystery around that interview never really disappeared. 7. Joaquin Phoenix. By 2009, celebrity interviews were already changing, but Joaquin Phoenix pushed the whole thing into even stranger territory. When he walked onto Letterman's set on February 11th, he looked almost unrecognizable. He had a beard down to his chest, long hair, sunglasses, and a wad of gum that he chewed loudly through the entire interview. He had recently announced that he was retiring from acting to become a rapper, and that alone had people curious. But once the interview began, curiosity turned into discomfort. Phoenix mumbled. He gave short answers. Sometimes he gave only one word. At one point, he told Letterman that he was making him uncomfortable. Finally, Letterman turned to the camera and delivered the line everyone remembers. "Joaquin, I'm sorry you couldn't be here tonight." At the time, viewers did not know what to make of it. Later, it turned out the whole appearance was part of a mockumentary directed by Casey Affleck called I'm Still Here, which was released in 2010. Phoenix had warned Letterman's producers that he planned to stay in character, but he had not warned Letterman himself. Then came another twist. In 2017, on Howard Stern's Sirius XM show, Letterman admitted that he actually had known about the bit in advance. "It was just easy," he said. "It was batting practice." Phoenix eventually came back to Letterman's couch on September 22, 2010, this time clean-shaven and out of character. He apologized and said, "I hope I didn't offend you in any way. You've interviewed many people, and I assumed that you would know the difference between a character and a real person, but I apologize." 8. Grace Jones. This one did not happen on American television, but it belongs on the list all the same. In November 1980, Grace Jones appeared on the BBC's Russell Harty show to promote her album warm leatherette. The setup itself turned out to be part of the problem. Because of the seating arrangement, host Russell Harty had to keep turning his back on Jones for long stretches while speaking to the others. She objected. He ignored her. So she hit him. Not once. Repeatedly. On the back and on the shoulders, right there in front of the cameras. Later, in her autobiography, Jones explained what had been going on that night. She wrote that she had been given bad coke before the interview, had not slept, was dealing with sinus problems, had been covered in pigeon droppings on the way to the studio, and at the moment she lashed out. She was hallucinating that Harty was her abusive step-grandfather, Maz P. She wrote, "I was all dressed up like an Amazonian seductress and treated like the hired help. Harty was rude. I wasn't going to put up with it. I lashed out on live television." 9. Oliver Reed. Oliver Reed had talent, pedigree, and a reputation that had grown almost as large as his drinking stories. He had earned BAFTA and Screen Actors Guild nominations. He was the grandson of RADA founder Sir Herbert Beerbohm Tree. And then there were the legends. One story claimed he once drank 126 pints of beer in 24 hours. Another said that while filming The Great Scout and Cathouse Thursday in Durango, Mexico, he drank Lee Marvin under the table until Marvin collapsed on the floor. So by the time Reed appeared on Michael Aspel's chat show, Aspel and Company, in 1987 to promote his comeback film Castaway, people already knew anything could happen. He arrived carrying a full pitcher of what he called gin and orange juice. Then things got even more chaotic. He tore off his sports coat, staggered over to the house band, and started singing along to his own pre-recorded cover of Wild Thing, while dancing, as one witness later put it, like a pickled monkey. During a 1987 appearance on Late Night with David Letterman to promote the same film, Reed yanked Letterman across the stage during their handshake, sat down, and launched into an impression of wrestler Macho Man Randy Savage while challenging Sylvester Stallone to a fight. Stallone was not even there. Late in Reed's life, the British show The Word started placing vodka bottles in his dressing room on purpose and secretly filming what happened next. He died in a pub in Malta in 1999 at the age of 61. 10. Tom Cruise. This one happened on daytime television, not late night, but it changed celebrity interviews so much that it cannot be left out. On May 23, 2005, Tom Cruise appeared on The Oprah Winfrey Show to promote War of the Worlds. He arrived at Harpo Studios in Chicago just 1 month after confirming his relationship with Katie Holmes, and the audience had been packed with Cruise superfans. From the start, he was full of energy. Earlier in the episode, Oprah reminded him that he had stood on his chair at her Legends Ball just days before, and she told him she loved his enthusiasm. He seemed to take that as encouragement. Then came the moment that took over pop culture. As Oprah pressed him about Holmes, Cruise dropped to one knee 5 different times, grabbed Oprah's hands and shook them 3 separate times, and then climbed onto the couch and stood on it. People often say he jumped on the couch, but really, he jumped onto it. That freeze-frame image of him in mid-leap, knees bent, would race across the internet and stay there for the next 2 decades. 11. Serge Gainsbourg. The setting was the French variety show Champs-Élysées, hosted by Michel Drucker. That night, a young Whitney Houston, only 22 years old, was making her first appearance on French television. It should have been a warm welcome and a proud moment in her rising career. She was introduced to Serge Gainsbourg, who was 58 and already seated on the couch in a tuxedo. He appeared drunk, slurring his words and barely steady. At first, the exchange seemed polite. Gainsbourg kissed Houston's hand and told her, "You are superb." Drucker translated for her. Then the mood changed in seconds. Gainsbourg leaned toward Drucker and said in English, "I want to fuck her." The audience gasped. Houston froze. She immediately asked what he had said. Drucker, trying to save the moment, quickly told her that Gainsbourg said he wanted to offer her flowers. But it did not end there. Gainsbourg cut in and corrected him. He said that was not true. Then he repeated the vulgar remark again, this time in French for the studio audience. 12. Meg Ryan arrived on Parkinson during a turning point in her career. She was promoting In the Cut, an erotic thriller directed by Jane Campion. It was a sharp move away from the romantic comedies that had made her famous. The interview could have explored that risk. Instead, it turned tense. Host Michael Parkinson focused heavily on her nude scenes and kept pressing her about the image she had built over the years. Ryan's answers became shorter. Her body language closed off. The energy on stage kept dropping. Still, Parkinson continued. Then he asked what she would do if she were the one in his chair. Ryan did not hesitate. Wrap it up. It was sharp, simple, and impossible to misunderstand. Later, Ryan said she kept waiting for a commercial break so she could stand up and leave. In American talk shows, breaks came every few minutes. But this was the BBC. The break never came. Years later, in 2021, Parkinson looked back and admitted he regretted the moment. He said he wished he had not lost his temper with Meg Ryan. 13. Paula Abdul. In January 2007, Paula Abdul was everywhere. She was promoting a new season of American Idol and had been booked for a long national press tour. The schedule was brutal. She reportedly did around 20 interviews back-to-back. Then came a satellite segment with Seattle's Fox Q13 Morning News, and that one became unforgettable. Abdul visibly swayed in her chair. Her words sounded slurred. At one point, she nearly drifted out of the camera frame. Some of her replies made little sense. Viewers were stunned. ABC News later described her as disheveled. Soon, the clip hit YouTube under the title, "Paula Abdul, What Is She Smokin'?" The internet had its story. Her publicist, Jeff Ballard, blamed technical problems and exhaustion. He said the audio failed more than once, and she was alone in a small room while people shouted into her microphone. Abdul denied drinking or taking medication. She had previously told People magazine that she was not addicted to pills of any kind. But late-night television moved quickly. Jay Leno mocked her the next week on The Tonight Show. Then, The Late Show with David Letterman launched a viewer contest titled Top 10 Reasons Why Paula Abdul is Nuts. When Abdul later called Leno's show to joke about it, she accidentally addressed him as Conan, confusing him with rival host Conan O'Brien. That only made the story bigger. 14. Harmony Korine. Harmony Korine built a reputation as one of the strangest young voices in independent film. He wrote Kids and directed Gummo and Julian Donkey Boy. He also became a memorable guest on Letterman. Korine appeared on The Late Show several times in the 1990s. During one visit in 1997, his answers were so mumbled and unclear that David Letterman turned to the camera and joked that viewers sitting at home eating Cheetos probably thought hosting was easy. Then, suddenly, Korine stopped appearing. No explanation came. For 15 years, fans guessed what happened. 15. Quentin Tarantino. This was not a late-night show, but it became one of the most replayed celebrity interviews of its time. Quentin Tarantino was promoting Django Unchained, which would receive 3 Oscar nominations the very next day. He sat down with Channel 4 news presenter Krishnan Guru Murthy. The interview began normally. Then Guru Murthy asked why Tarantino was so sure there was no connection between movie violence and real-life violence. Tarantino shut down immediately. "Don't ask me a question like that," he said. "I'm not biting." But the host kept pressing. Tarantino became more heated with every reply. He said he was not anyone's slave, and nobody could make him dance to their tune. He said he was not a monkey. The irony was impossible to miss. He was promoting a film set during American slavery, yet seemed blind to the language he was using. Then he made his real position clear. He said he was there to sell his movie. It was a commercial for the movie. He did not want to discuss violence or its implications. 16. Cher. For years, Cher refused to appear on Letterman's show. He had mocked her many times in his monologues, and she had no interest in rewarding that. Then, in May 1986, she finally said yes. The audience expected sparks. They got them immediately. Letterman asked why she had avoided the show for so long. Cher looked at him and answered with total calm. "Because I thought you were an asshole." The crowd exploded, but she was not finished. She told him she had watched the way he treated guests. Sometimes he was great and seemed to like them. Other times, if he did not like them, they might as well bring a picnic lunch. Letterman laughed. He did not argue. A decade later, she returned in 1996. This time she sat with her arms crossed for the entire interview. When asked why she had come back, she said she needed to pay her hotel bill and wanted to see what this guy was really like. Then she looked at him again. "You're an asshole." Some guests try to survive late-night television. Cher turned it into her stage. 17. Paris Hilton. Paris Hilton had just served 23 days in a Los Angeles County jail for violating probation tied to a reckless driving case. Soon after, she appeared on Letterman's show, officially there to promote her perfume. That was the official reason. The real subject was jail. Letterman opened by asking how she liked being in jail. Hilton, clearly uncomfortable, said not too much. Then came more questions. The food, the inmates, the bars. Every answer led to another question. She tried to move on. Eventually, she said she did not really want to talk about it because it was old news. Letterman answered that this was where they were different, because to him, it was new news. 18. Kanye West. When Kanye West feels mocked, he rarely stays quiet. After Jimmy Kimmel parodied one of Kanye's BBC Radio 1 interviews, Kanye exploded on Twitter. In all caps, he accused Kimmel of disrespect and made it clear he did not find any of it funny. Instead of backing away, Kimmel invited him onto the show 6 days later. What followed was nearly 20 minutes of pure Kanye. He told Kimmel he had won the Super Bowl of creativity. He declared himself the #1 rock star on the planet. Then came the line that instantly became headline material. When someone says, "I am a god," everybody asks, who does he think he is? I just told you who I thought I was, a god. Kimmel mostly let him speak. At one point, Kanye leaned toward him and delivered another cutting line. He said Kimmel did not have the power to make him look like an asshole. He was Jimmy Kimmel. 19. Lindsay Lohan. Lindsay Lohan came to The Late Show to promote her cameo in Scary Movie 5. But promotion never really happened. Letterman opened the interview by reading what looked like a prepared list of her legal problems year by year. Then he leaned in and asked her if she was not supposed to be in rehab already. Her expression dropped instantly. She quietly replied that they had not discussed this in the pre-interview. But Letterman continued. He asked what they were rehabbing. What would they work on when she arrived? She struggled to answer. Many viewers called the segment cruel. Critics later noted that she had already been in rehab multiple times, with the upcoming stay becoming another chapter in a very public struggle. Letterman never apologized. Lohan entered the Betty Ford Center on May 2, 2013. 20. Shelley Winters. This is the oldest moment on the list, and in many ways, the blueprint for all chaotic talk show television that followed. Actress Shelley Winters, 50 years old, arrived on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson and sat beside host Johnny Carson. She was already upset. Her co-guest that night was actor Oliver Reed, who had recently been giving interviews saying women were intellectually inferior. Winters held a glass of bourbon while he spoke. Then Reed repeated his views. Without saying a word, Winters stood up, crossed the set, and poured the entire glass over his head. The bourbon soaked through his suit. Carson was stunned, then burst into laughter so hard he nearly fell from his chair. Winters calmly returned to her seat, as if nothing unusual had happened. Later, she explained herself in one perfect sentence. She felt someone had to make a stand.